My talk today is about a very specific major change that is taking place in China and in the globe today. This is the immense and ambitious One Belt, One Road, or as it is also known as the New Silk Road or Belt and Road. So there is some change in terminology, but the idea that began in 2013 promises to be transformative, not only for China, but for the 60 countries or more that are partners with China, committed to infrastructural investment and to build a community of destiny. So we have some key concepts here. Infrastructural investment. We have the concept of a community of destiny. We have the notion of soft power, that using these instruments and a strategy, China is working with this large number of countries, which itself is unprecedented, to build something new, to create new institutions, a new consensus, new rules for the global economy. So we look at this slide, and we see that there are two parts to the Belt and Road. First part is a land route which will link Beijing to Rotterdam and to London. The second part of the route is a maritime route, which is a bit more abstract. If we skipped geography class when we were in high school, but we will remember that all great powers have had preeminence both on the waters, on the oceans, as well as territorially. So this is a unique project because in its simplicity lies a complexity. The simplicity is that China signs individual agreements with these 60 countries to build a variety of projects. So there are over 1,000 projects. So you might ask yourselves, well, what is China building in Zambia or Mozambique or the Sudan or with Turkey or Iran or in Latin America with a variety of countries which are not part of the One Belt, One Road, but are still part of the same initiative, or with Russia, or with the Federation of Independent States. So when you ask yourself, how can an agreement be a step towards new institutions, new rules of the game, new kinds of global governance? So that is the question that we have to think about. And I want to give you a bit of a progress report on the goals and outcomes of the New Silk Road to date. So first we have to sort of solve this question, if you're a good student, of infrastructure. Infrastructure is like the oxygen of the economy, the nervous system, and in more contemporary language, we can think of it as a super app. It's not an app you can get at the Apple Store or in one of the places in China you buy your apps from. So when we look at China's experience over the last 20 years, investment in infrastructure has been transformative and catalytic. So we tend to take infrastructure a bit for granted. But if there is a blackout or if there is some kind of problem and we miss the infrastructure, all of a sudden we realize how critical it is to everyday life. Now, the Asian Development Bank recently released a report which is of great importance to us because it identified what it called the global infrastructural deficit. So for much of the global south, people do not have access to clean water, to proper sanitation, to continuous electricity, proper roads. And the country in the global south who is a leader in investment in infrastructure, modern infrastructure, is China. So I don't have to remind everyone here today of the pivotal role the Three Gorges Dam played in the transformation of China, nor is it necessary to go on at any length about this incredible engineering feat, the diversion of the Yellow and the Yangtze rivers, or the fact that China has 60% or more of the world's bullet trains. So this experience in China's history of the role of infrastructure as a key factor of development has taught a great lesson to the countries of the global south, to Europe, to Central Asia, that one of the keys of development is to transform infrastructure as a way to catalyze the economy and to acquire a modern capacity, both for people and for goods and exports. So very quickly then, I should show you a few slides. Just to remind you that China first is in a position to play a leadership role in the space of 20 years. If you read the chart, you will see that China leapfrogged from being 11th in a world ranking by size of merchandise exports to being number 1. So this tells us two things. First of all, China has transformed itself in the last 20 years. Most of you were not born probably at the beginning 20 years ago, or some of you were, and you were very small. But you can see that in the space of your adolescence and young adulthood, that China itself has changed profoundly. So as China has changed so dramatically economically, the issue of global governance issues moves to the front and center of the world stage. Now, I don't want to, this is our friend Donald, not a friend of mine, but a friend, but he's a significant player because in the language of the realist, he's a game changer. He's a game changer for a lot of different reasons. But for China, United States and China are both friends and rivals. In some periods, greater cooperation. In other periods, less. And of course, we are now entering a period of great uncertainty. So for China, this represents an opportunity as the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, has been dissolved by Trump. And now China has become, perhaps in ways that none of us thought, would be the defender of the next stage of globalization. This is often spoken of. The next stage can be thought of perhaps as globalization 2.0 or globalization 3.0 or 4.0 or interconnectivity, all these things. But in reality, this is not the next stage of globalization. This would be my hypothesis, something you might want to consider. The next stage of globalization is about addressing economic inequality and global poverty. So if you follow my logic and my line of thinking, the One Belt, One Road plays a critical role in the shift in world politics that is taking place. Now, a second reason for some of you who follow these things and others who might want to think about these things is that the World Trade Organization is largely sidelined for different reasons, but it's deadlocked partly because the Global South will not sign any deal which disadvantages them. But the key point is that if the WTO its rules are still operative, but there is room. You must create space, political space, economic space, institutional space for new actors and new practices. So one of the reasons I'm interested in the One Belt and One Road, and I'm a bit of a charm offensive when I say this, is because it allows us to follow how things actually happen and evolve in the world economy today. You must have a leader. You must have a leader with deep pockets. That is China. You have a leader in China at the leadership level in President Xi's vision of what he calls a community of destiny. To have a community, you must have rules. You must have means of collective action. You must have means to, you must have resources. You must have some kind of legal structure, probably, eventually. But it might be embryonic, this idea that things begin in ways we don't really understand, for reasons we don't really understand, because there is no simple chain of causality. And what we might see happening is a form, embryonic again, of a kind of new multilateral system, China-based multilateralism, rather than the Bretton Woods system, which some of us know was at the foundation in the post-1945 world. So there was a party here in Beijing, a pretty big party. It was the launch party for the One Belt and One Road in 2017. 60 member countries attended. There were about 20 premiers and presidents from a variety of countries, and there were 40 other observers, including the United States. So in total, there were 100 countries represented. I would say this was a big moment. This was a game changer to have this kind of a global launch. The model, as I said, was based upon China's own experience. You cannot become successful in infrastructural development unless China itself had learned about success and failure in infrastructure development in the last 30 years in the dramatic changes in China itself. So what you get in the Chinese model are 5 things. You get, first of all, deep pockets. Secondly, you get proven Chinese technology, because when China builds these projects around the world, these complex mega projects, they rely on Chinese technology and expertise. In England, for instance, China is a partner with France in the development of the new nuclear plant that is being built there at Point Hinckley. You also get a culture of management, which is a very interesting concept, why a socialist country would develop expertise as part of its culture of management, again, without repetition through its own experience. Then, of course, you have, finally, you have a highly flexible form of diplomacy, tons of diplomacy. It's a very plastic form of diplomacy. It's the opposite of what is offered in both the World Bank and the IMF, which tend to use a template approach. So for China, each country it negotiates with is very different from the next. So what China negotiates with Pakistan is different from what it negotiates with Kyrgyzstan. Yes, if you say, well, why is China doing this? Is it an altruistic actor not concerned about its core interests? I would say no, because the aim of the One Belt, One Road is to increase China exports, to gain access to new markets, and to secure energy supply from Central Asia to be brought overland through a beachhead of pipes and other forms of oil pipelines rather than by sea through the Straits of Malacca, which is dangerous and problematic. So China gets a lot out of this. And finally, China gets perhaps the most important. I know I've talked to you about economics. I know none of you care about economics. When you have a job, you care about economics. When you don't have a job. But what is critical in the One Belt, One Road, and this is the point I want to end on, this is about building relationships with countries throughout the world. This is the embryonic, the seed for something larger and more important. Many of you know the Chinese word, well, the Chinese word everyone knows, obviously only me, which is guangxi, which means that the politics of the One Belt, One Road is as important as the economic objectives. Thank you very much for your patience.